Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Touch Not channel. Thanks so very much for being back here with us once again. Hey, I've been looking forward to this very, very much today. We have with us from England and Scotland today, and from Maine in the United States. Allie Warren is here with us. She's the Sealed Knot Society Education Lead. She does all the educational type things, and I imagine public relations and some other things for the Sealed Knot Society, which is a reenactment group reenacting the 17th century happenings that we've been talking about, John Demos and I. So Allie Warren's here from Sealed Knot Society as well. On the lower right here is Michael Netton. Mike is portraying a musketeer in what was called William Gordon's of Monamore's regiment. He's involved with the Sealed Knot Society. He has a regiment he's attached to as part of that, you might say. I believe this is right. I'm going to iron all this out, though, my friends, during this talk. And as well, John Demos from the Old Berwick Historical Society in South Berwick, Maine, is back with us. Hi, John.
Hey Ray, good to see you.
Thanks for being here, my friends. We've been at this for over 2 years, I want to say. John and I have been producing several segments related all around those times, roughly 2 decades within the middle of the 1600s. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Good. I neglected to say Allie's in Wiltshire, England right now, and Michael is outside of Glasgow, Scotland.
And I'm about 3,000 miles from Oxford or York. Yeah, so or
There you
more.
go. Thanks for pinpointing that, John.
Well, I'm actually a couple miles from York, Maine, but
Absolutely right. So could you begin, Allie, and give us an overview of what the Sealed Knot Society meant to people back in the 17th century and what it's functioning as now?
Okay, so the Sealed Knot Society, as it now is, was originally formed in 1968 by a distinguished soldier and historian, a man called Brigadier Peter Young, who, amongst the many things that he did in life, he was something of a war hero. He was multiple decorated. He earned the DSO twice. But he was extremely interested in the English Civil War in the 17th century, and he wrote a number of books which are still to this day amongst the leading volumes you go to when you want to find out about battles like Naseby or Marsden Moor.
I see.
And he had one of these books and he wanted to publicize it. So he and some friends got together. They put on some 17th century costume, and I use that term very loosely, and reenacted part of the battle. And they had such fun that they decided they'd go and do it again and again and again. And out of that was born the society that I am now a member of and have been a member of since 1979. The original Sealed Knot Society was a secret group that was formed during the interregnum to try and encourage the return of the king, as it were. So they worked underground to try and see if they could bring back Charles II, as he, of course, became. And a lot of that work was done, of course, by Scottish noblemen, because it was from Scotland that he got his greatest support at that time.
Oh.
These days, the society is organised like two armies, the Royalist and the Parliamentary Army, but each with a Lord General. And below that, then each army has a number of regiments to which individual groups belong. So I'm on the Royalist side. I am a member of Charles Gerard's Regiment of Foot, which is a regiment that was raised in South Wales and Lancashire. But we cover pretty much all of the country, because obviously these days though we still kind of think of it as the English Civil War, increasingly historians like to think of it as the British Civil War, because it covers all of the British Isles.
Yes.
All the way from the Scilly Isles all the way up to Shetland. So we try to think of it in a slightly more wider way than perhaps our predecessors did. So within those groups, what you will find is that each regiment will have the usual panoply of arms. So there will be pikemen, there will be musketeers like Mike and previously myself. And along with that, you'll have artillery, who will have we have our own cannon within our regiment, and a group of people who also do what we call living history, which means that they set up encampments to represent what the soldiers would have lived in,
Right.
but also to give you an insight into 17th century life in its widest sense. So you get people there who are musicians, you get people there who are painters, you get people there who are carpenters. There are people who are there as doctors, barber surgeons in the loosest sense of that. And of course, a lot of cooking goes on, and it's one of the places where you'll find the ladies of each regiment, and of course men, because a lot of the cooking was done by men during the 17th century, because it was such actually hard labour to actually bring a meal to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Just moving water and wood in order to be able to cook was something that required quite a lot of muscle, so it wasn't necessarily the thing that was left to the women. Yeah, so what else can I help you with? What else can I tell you?
I can certainly see how this must be lovely to appear in the center of a town. So, and a lot of these regiments were localized, correct, or attached to
Yeah.
a nobleman or a place or something there, right? And people today are
Yes.
actually, Michael, perhaps, and maybe you as well, Ali, actual relatives of people, right? Family members perhaps were in this, and that's why people like yourselves are today. Is that true to a point?
I think it's true that we certainly are drawn to geographical areas, and the regiments are based on the actual men who founded the regiments, because of course we didn't have a standing army.
Yeah.
Not really until Cromwell decided to raise the new model army was there any kind of standing army. So when any kind of conflict broke out, it was up to the local lord of the manor, as it were, to draw people from his local area. And so in the case of my regiment, Sir Charles Gerard, he was his family home was in Lancashire, but he also had very strong connections to South Wales. So that's basically where we draw most of our recruits from. Although, of course, the way people move now, whilst we
Right.
started off with a really strong contingent in Lancashire and in South Wales, and we still have those things, a lot of us have moved out of the area and are no longer based there. So my husband was from South Wales, which was how I ended up being in Gerrard's, whereas originally I was with the Marquis of Newcastle's regiment, because of my involvement with my connections with Yorkshire. My grandmother was from Yorkshire, so that's how it happens. These days, you will find a regiment. You will find. I'm sure Mike will agree with this, that some of the Scottish regiments have got people who are living in London, as we've got people who are in our regiment who are living in Cornwall and who are living in Luton and all over the country. But that's just the nature of 21st century living, rather than reflecting historical truths. So we travel a great deal. We go where we are invited. So because we need a lot of space. The Sealed Knot is currently a membership of just under 4,000 people, and we can field around about 1,500 to 2,000 people on the field for what we call our major musters. So it's quite a sight. But that also means we need a lot of space. We need a lot of space for our camping, and we need a lot of space for our battles. Because whilst our ancestors didn't care about injuring each other, we have to, because we still want them the following day. And that's kind of important to us.
Ali, John D. Back in the 17th century, like you said, many of the troops were coming from Wales all the way over to York, which is in Yorkshire, of course, and Lancashire is next to that, west of that, right? And
yeah,
is that correct? And how those trains of support, including all the women, which is something that really especially interests me, the women's role. That must have been a grueling uh, process to move that far over the country and carrying goods and providing for the troops, right?
Yeah, well, this is where we talk about the baggage train. We talk about that particular part of it, and it's remarkable how quickly they could move. Sometimes they did do forced marches. There is a famous occasion when Prince Rupert had troops in Yorkshire and was needed to come in to support a siege of the city of Gloucester, because that part of the country was really important to and was fought over very heavily during the war
Mhm.
because of the communication lines and, of course, the importance of the port of Bristol. And they did a forced march and they managed to get themselves from Yorkshire, from just outside York, where they were, down to Gloucester in 2 days on foot.
Wow.
And they had wagons and they were mostly pulled by bullocks, but a lot of it was being carried on people's backs.
Mhm.
It's when you look at things like their diet is very heavy on carbs. Each soldier's ration was 2 pounds of bread, a pound of cheese, and 8 pints of beer a day, which is that's a lot of calories. But they needed every one of those calories and to fulfill the act of marching from one place to another.
Hmm.
And of course, if you were the higher classes, you'd have all your servants as well. You'd have all of your equipment, your camp beds, your seating, your all of that to make your life as comfortable as possible. And it
Right.
certainly seems to, all of the records of the time talk about the soldiery coming across the land like a plague of locusts. And later in the war, some local groups, some small villages would gather together and they called themselves clubmen. And the clubmen would form basically to protect their village, so that the soldiers wouldn't come and take things.
Yep.
Because they were starving because they weren't leaving them anything. They were taking everything. They were particularly things like cattle and chickens, and that the stuff that the local farmers would have kept and kept going in order to feed their people. They found themselves in this position. The clubmen weren't on one side or the other. They just wanted to protect their own land,
Mhm.
to stop this going on.
That's one of the things I thought a lot about was this, what do they call it when you're just foraging, I suppose is the word, I, I've often thought they must have come through towns and just left everything in the fields uprooted and everything. Obviously, you can tell a farmer's going to hold that club in his hand firm because he's been raising those animals since who knows when, and that's his family. That's his family's future right there.
Yeah,
Um,
but and particularly during the latter half of the war. I mean, to start with, the war was quite gentlemanly. They didn't fight during the winter. The men would go home at harvest time, so they could go and do all that. But as the conflict became more bitter, then there was fighting going on throughout the whole year, and that also meant that the men who would have been working on the fields weren't there. They were they were actually with the army. So trying to keep people alive, trying to get enough food was what did become a problem, and that there was starvation. They calculate that during the English Civil War, there was more deaths in the population than there were in the First World War because it was so universally affecting.
hmm.
And Ray and I are putting together a talk on the Marston Moor and the English Civil War, and I'm reading about when Newcastle came into York, 1644, and he's burning all the northern neighborhoods to, a scorched earth to prevent the invading armies from being able to collect
Oh yeah.
goods. That's correct. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that was necessary, and of course Marsden Moor proved to be a turning point for Newcastle's troops. But
Mhm.
that's maybe a conversation for another day.
Yes.
But I brought with me, just to give you some idea of a few examples of some of the things that might have been on that baggage train.
Oh.
So one of the things that a lot of people get confused about is to do with drinking vessels. A lot of people think that it's all pewter tankards. Well, the most common things that were being made were they were usually pottery, because it was cheap and you could make a lot of it. So I bought some. I don't know whether we'll be able to see these. So so can you see this? This is a Bellarmine.
Yes, quite well. Okay.
Yes, the Bellamy
Can you
jar.
see? Can you see on the front there? There's a bearded man on the front there. Just trying to see if I can get in the right position for the camera.
And those were used as witch bottles too. I've read, that those bottles, when they're empty, they would use it as a potion against witches here in the United States. And I'm not sure if I believe it also.
I've not heard that one. That's a new story.
Needles and all.
They're called Bellarmine after this figure on the front, who was an apothecary of some fame. And the whole idea was you put this face on the front of the jug in order to keep the belief was that if it was there, it would preserve it for longer, because that kind of folk magic.
Interesting.
And then there's the ones that came from Holland. So these are very posh ones. So this is Delftware, and this is a copy of a sack bottle. So sack was a sort of white wine, and it was used not just as a drinking thing, but also in medicinal things like posset, which was given to sick people to make them feel better. So they send you to bed with a dish of cream and wine and sugar and spices, and that should make you feel better. And I suppose if it didn't make you feel better, at least it made you feel cheerful.
Right.
And my favourite ones, because these are the ones I collect really. This is slipware. I don't know. I'm just trying to get it in the right place. So this is very ordinary. It's very ordinary terracotta. You can just see from the bottom. But what they've done is that they decorate it with very, very loose clay, and they put symbols on it. So this one says "Praise the Lord." I've got all sorts of ones that they're like this, and my own drinking tankard is like this. They're very crude designs, and you can see, just trying to get this in the right position. You see, it's very crude designs, but they are if you go to anywhere where there was habitation or there were battles, you will find pieces of this in the soil very, very easily, along with the musket balls and all the other metal bits and pieces. But that's what we have. We use to serve food in and to arrange for people when we're actually cooking for them.
Yeah, so we've been talking an awful lot about eating, but I'm thinking about heating as well.
We're not sure how true they are, but certainly the Parliament Army were no respecters of churches, for example. So there's evidence that they used some churches as stables, particularly the high churches, because they didn't believe in the decoration, so they felt no need to protect them.
Yes.
Mostly people seem to have slept where they could, and kept warm that way, which was hard because this 17th century, middle to late 17th century period, we were going through a mini ice age, so the temperatures were very low. It affects us as reenactors because we pull on all this wool. We wear pure wool garments in all the layers that we do. And on a nice climate changed summer's day, it can be very hot. But in the 17th century, the temperatures were, on average, about 5 degrees lower. And this is the time when, certainly when we get into the Restoration, there are frost fairs. The River Thames froze so hard that they could actually hold parties on it. And to test it, they walked an elephant across it just to prove that it was, that's how cold it was. But I think our ancestors were kind of used to being that little bit colder than we were. But I'm sure that Mike nodded when I said about the amount of wool that we wear, and there's sometimes on a hot day it can be a bit much.
Right.
just
So,
a wee bit.
yeah, I mean, our clothes are made of wool and linen because those are the um, authentic fabrics that would have been used. And you're wearing at least 3 layers. And also, as frankly, as a musketeer, you kind of probably need it because it's that which gives you a little bit of protection against, when a musket goes, what you get is you get a great big flash. And if the wind is in the wrong direction, then there are little tiny bits of burning embers in the air. And every musketeer I know has got their doublets are all a little tiny bit holy.
So
Is
that
that, is that
that occurs now too when you're firing your muskets and you get that blowback, and so
Yeah, for sure.
there's protection.
No, well, I shall turn that over to Mike. I mean, I suspect he's probably fired a musket more recently than I have. Would that be accurate, Mike?
Yeah, it's fair to say. If I look at my clothes, my reenacting clothing, there's small powder burns in it, which you won't notice at the time, but you bring it back home and look at it, and you think, it's peppered with small burn holes, which have been, been the case where, in reality as well, historically. Um, Hence the reason why there was also, the clothing, wore out on campaign. So they had to requisition clothing from the boroughs, or cloth at least, to make new clothing for the men. So these are just one of the things, is the kind of the wear and tear on the field.
Yeah, some of the troops look very tatty. I mean, there was a lot of discussion about how poorly clothed, for example, the Irish troops that were brought over to support, how badly they were dressed. They were, some of them, they talk about their bottoms sticking out because they've worn through their breeches because they just don't have the quality of the fabric. It's also what they've been living in for days on end.
Which
Um,
I was reading about that recently too, and the Irish came back when they were brought back to fight on the side of the king, and they were supplying new clothing to them, and a lot of them sold them for drink, right?
Yeah, well, you give
unfortunately.
somebody something new and there's something else they can do with it, then they might well they
Yeah,
might well try that.
but that's a modern warfare problem too. I mean, you see like from World War II or even the Vietnam War or something where people, out in the field for some time and they end up in rags, yeah, because it's just so hard on the clothing. Yeah.
Just,
Well, if
just,
you
just,
think
to-
about
just, to, just to
wearing the
cut.
same
Oh, sorry,
clothing,
Alan.
no, go on, Mike.
No, just to cut in about the Irish. I mean, certainly in Montrose's army, who had a lot of Irish troops. I mean, there's some. I mean, so evidence was pretty sparse with the Irish war, but I think traditionally the Irish were kind of, traditionally dressed in trews, by and large. And sort of, and short coats and such like. Um, so there's a thought, that when they came across the fight for Montrose, they were kind of, traditionally dressed in trews and the native dress. But as I said, on campaign, clothing wore out. So when they were marching through, I think it's Perth and Aberdeen, they requisitioned, clothing and or raided, the stores. So by the end of the campaign, they were pretty much conventionally dressed like the rest of the troops. So you couldn't really distinguish them from, say, a Lowland Scot, or a kind of an English troops, because they're
Which
all
was one of
dressed.
that was one of the problems in the battles too, I've read. And I was reading about the hat tags, which were so interesting
Yes.
for identification. I mean, you had flags and you had colors and you had things like hat tags for the individual soldiers, but sometimes the hat tags in some battles were forgotten country or something on both sides. And so there was a lot of confusion with friendly fire because of that.
There was I mean, and I'll go on. I'll go on to talk about our kind of colours, but I mean, there was, within Scotland, there was various kind of field signs. There was one of the battles. It was the Battle of, let me get this right, I think it was the Battle of Aberdeen, where Montrose's troops stuck. They were marching through an oat field, and they just stuck some oats stalks into the bonnets of their hats, so that the Aberdeen townsfolk, to try and sort of make, sort of kind of to disguise themselves, and look as though they were, they had the same allegiance, did the same thing, but they were found out. But it's not like the Covenanters were known to have wear like either blue ribbons. There was some documented evidence that the royalists were wearing sort of flesh-coloured ribbons. I think later on it was black as well mentioned. Certainly in our unit, William Gordon's, we wear sort of flesh-coloured ribbons in our bonnets, distinguish ourselves. But and I'll go to this later on. But in terms of clothing, I mean, if you were Scots fighting Scots, you were pretty much identical. So the only thing that distinguished your unit maybe was your kind of field sign on your bonnet or your hat, or the colour, which was a rallying point.
Hmm.
And
Hopefully
this
you
was
weren't by
this.
yourself. Oh, I'm sorry. Hopefully you weren't by yourself anyway. You had several people with you with a similar hat or something or other. So I wouldn't think you'd pick that out from a far distance, although I'm thinking of a
No,
modern weapon. I'm thinking of a modern weapon now, and you're not shooting anyone from way off anyway.
And
Too
with the
far.
powders, the smoky battlefields. I mean, like in the American Civil War, we still had, battlefields that were totally obscured by the powder. So it must have been quite a lot of confusion.
I mean, you think the kind of the common cloth, it's a bit of an elastic term. You've heard of Hodden Grey. So Hodden Grey was, I suppose, the country cloth in Scotland, and it could
Okay.
range from, and it was essentially it was like a mix of undyed wool, because it could be a mixture like almost like a brown tones into sort of grey, almost black.
Mhm.
You can imagine, a field full of men dressed the same. You can imagine the confusion, and I dare say there was friendly fire. Is
Right. So today's blue jeans, you could almost equate it with Michael.
I suppose you could. I suppose you could. I
I
suppose you
mean,
could, Ray. I mean,
everyone's got jeans on, and right. Okay.
I suppose you could. I mean, I suppose it's a bit like going back to John's analogy about this American Civil War, where they had the Confederates one side and the Union troops on the other side. I mean, I suppose they were, but there could be friendly fire. They're all dressed alike, and in the
Mhm.
confusion of battle, you didn't know friend from foe.
Right.
And sometimes, to be fair, there there was people swapping sides and maybe not even noticing. There is certainly evidence to suggest that there was one chap during the Battle of Naseby who found himself fighting on the opposite side and just stayed with the opposite. He was a royalist. He found himself in the middle of the parliamentarian troops and he stayed there for a bit. Then he went back to the other side, found somebody he knew and stayed with them for a bit. And then he got himself lost again. And this was within a battle that wasn't very long. It was a matter of hours in its length, but he managed to get himself hopelessly confused. And this is somebody who was, of the officer class. So he would have had, some kind of it's insignia on him, a sash that would have told you where he was. But it was very easy to swap sides, and there's certainly quite a lot of evidence to suggest that when things didn't look like they were going the way of your side, you might slope off and join the others, and nobody would know.
Wow. Wow.
Nobody would know,
Wow.
because everybody was so similarly dressed. Because there wasn't such a thing as a uniform.
Right.
Your landlord, the lord of the manor, whoever, said, right, okay, we're all going to go off and we're going to go and fight for whoever. The only thing that he might provide you with, clothing wise, might be your doublet, might be your jacket. So some people were richer than others and they paid for a little bit more. There are lots of records of the purchase of different fabrics, different coloured fabrics,
Mhm.
and the value of that. For instance, the King's Guard wear red. And one of the reasons why the Guard wear red is because red is what they call a twice dyed colour. in order to get it from the natural color, you need to dye it twice to get the intensity of the red. And of course, that makes it more expensive.
Yeah, it's more expensive because the dye is expensive.
Yeah. The most expensive color is black, because black is what they call thrice dyed. You have to dye it 3 times to get that intensity of black, which is why you see, when you see portraits of people of the period, it doesn't matter what side they are on, they tend to be wearing black, because it's the show off color. It says, look, I'm very wealthy because I can afford the most expensive cloth.
When she said an officer got lost in the battle, Michael, I got to say
I
to
did.
you, a little bit of too much of a chuckle there. He's a little bit too happy to hear that, I think.